Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Adirondack Forest Ecology and case study on hemlock woolly adelgid in the Great Smoky Mountains. My name is Sean Kittle. I am the communications coordinator with the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program, and I'm going to get things rolling for us this morning. So we have three main speakers today. Our first is going to be Dr. Mark Lesser. He is the Associate Professor for Center for Earth and Environmental Science at SUNY Plattsburgh. Then we have Jesse Webster, Forester and Resource Manager with Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And last but not least, we have the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Programs Manager, Tammara Van Ryn. After a brief welcome, we're going to get right into the forest ecology section. We're going to hear from Mark Lesser, who's going to talk about Adirondack forest ecology. Mark will also highlight two key Adirondack tree species, hemlock and American beech. Both of those species are now at risk from invasive forest pests or pathogens, namely hemlock woolly adelgid and beech leaf disease. After Mark, we'll have a Q&A before handing things over to Jesse Webster, who is with us today all the way from Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us today. You traveled a great distance to be here. We appreciate it. Jesse is going to talk about the effect that hemlock woolly adelgid has had on the Great Smoky Mountains forests, and he'll share with us what people down there are doing about it. And then finally, we'll have a Q&A with Jesse, and then we'll hear from Tammara Van Ryn, who will share what you can do to help APIPP and scientists gather information on hemlock woolly adelgid and beech leaf disease. Tammara will provide an overview of APIPP's Volunteer Forest Pest Hunters Program and IMAP Invasives, which is New York State's invasive species database, and that's online. She'll talk more about that. We ask that you please save your questions for the Q&As. You're welcome to type questions into the chat as you think of them, but please don't interrupt the speakers. And please keep yourselves on mute. During the Q&A, you will have an opportunity to come off mute to ask questions as well, but please just be sure to mute yourself afterwards. And real quick, before we begin, there's a lot of people on here today, and I realize some of you might not be totally familiar with APIPP and who we are and what we do. So I'm just going to give you a really quick rundown, and then we'll get right into it. APIPP is one of 8 PRISMs, that's PRISM, and it stands for Partnerships for Regional Invasive Species Management. And there are 8 of those PRISMs across New York State. You can see the map here where they are located. Our service area is the Adirondack Park, and we go all the way north up to the Canadian border. Our program is funded by the Environmental Protection Fund, which is administered by the New York State DEC. And we are housed in the Nature Conservancy's Keene Valley office, which is right here in the Adirondacks. So APIPP's mission is to work in partnership to minimize the impact of invasive species on the Adirondack region's communities, lands, and waters. Since invasive species are primarily spread by human activity, our outreach efforts largely revolve around public education and prevention. Basically, it's a lot easier to prevent invasive species from spreading than it is to deal with them once they're here. We also empower the public through trainings where we teach people to identify invasive species and to do their own management of the invasives that might be on their property. And in the field, our team focuses on managing priority infestations. We're able to work on land, and we're also able to work in aquatic spaces as well. We have partnerships with about 30 organizations around the region, and those partners really help us amplify our efforts, reach more people, and cover more ground, as do our volunteers. We have volunteers who have been with us for more than 20 years, and they're out there surveying lakes and trails for invasives and reporting any invasive species that they find. So again, after Jesse Webster's talk, Tammara is going to get into how you can get involved by volunteering. And lastly, I just want to give a shout out to our website. You can learn more about our work and volunteering and invasive species in general at www.adkinvasives.com. And with that, let's get right into Dr. Mark Lesser. And Mark, you can go ahead and request access. Got it?
Great, I think so. Yep. Okay. Thank you, Sean, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to give this talk, which I have to say is, as I thought more about putting this talk together on Adirondack forest ecology, I teach a whole class, a whole semester on this topic. I'm fitting this into 25 minutes or so became a little daunting. And so, of course, I'm not going to, comprehensively cover Adirondack forest ecology. I'm going to touch on a few things, kind of give us a general overview and highlight some of the things that I'm, maybe biased, but personally interested in. A lot of my research revolves around species migration, tree species migration patterns and their range limits and how those might be impacted by different environmental and climatic factors. And so, having said that, let's dive right into this. My cursor. So just to give us, start off kind of at the larger scale of New York State. On this map here showing just forest ownership, as Sean was saying, we can, clearly, and Tammara was talking about it, I guess, before we began today, we can clearly see the Adirondack area outlined just by, looking at forest ownership here as the forest preserve lands interspersed with state forest and privately owned forest in the northeastern part of New York State. And if we switch to looking at the forest types within New York State, we can clearly see how the Adirondack stands out as this massive, contiguous forested area, primarily made up of mixed northern hardwoods, spruce fir forest in the mountains, spruce fir forest again in the flats and some of the lowland areas. And we'll get more into that in a minute. But if we zoom in on the Adirondack Park itself, this is a 6 million acre park, and 5 million of those acres are forested acres. Again, it might be a little small, but most of that is deciduous forest, like I just said, and mixed with evergreen forest, the darker greens at the upper elevations and at the lower elevations as well in some cases. And the other important thing to point out from just thinking about broadly about the different forest types and ecosystems that are in the Adirondacks is all of this light blue, a lot of which is here in the northwestern part of the Adirondacks, but that's all woody wetland areas, which provides really unique and different habitats, ecosystems within this forested environment. One of the things that makes the Adirondacks, really interesting from an ecological point of view, if we put the cursor here on the Adirondacks, is that it's situated, at this large spatial scale in this really, fascinating area, kind of at the convergence or the where we're seeing the meeting of these two biomes, the boreal forest to the north and the temperate deciduous forest to the south. And here in New York and across this kind of latitudinal band is what we can think of as the boreal temperate ecotone, where those two biomes meet. And we get the southern extent of a lot of species that otherwise only grow to the north of this area and are at their southern range limits here in the boreal temperate ecotone. And we get the northern range limits of a lot of deciduous species that are much more common further to the south. And this becomes really important for some species, particularly those boreal species, like I said, that are at their lowland, in particular, their lowland limits here in the Adirondacks. And for instance, black spruce, you can see it occurs to some degree in small scattered pockets south of here, but really those are at higher elevations. And so in lowland areas, primarily, peatlands, forested bog environments, this is, the southern extent of this species. Likewise with eastern larch, with balsam fir, and with northern white cedar. And these are all species then that, are potentially going to be impacted most strongly by warming climate, by changing environmental conditions and pushed to the north over the coming decades or centuries. Beyond, though, this kind of, large scale or latitudinal gradients that we can think of, that make the Adirondack area unique being in that ecotone region. We can also think about more fine scale differences, primarily in topography and soil type and geology. that also change the forest dramatically over the landscape as we move across the Adirondacks, from moraine type lowland environments where we see, on oat-wash plains where we see predominantly pine communities, to then in wetlands, like I was just talking about, where we see spruce, fir, and larch. And on kind of richer fen environments, we might see a lot of cedar as well. And then as we move on to under more leached tills, but still at low elevations, we move into that mixed conifer and hardwood forest. As we continue upwards on well-drained rich tills, we get into that very, characteristic northern hardwood forest, beech, maple, birch, lots of other things, but those being the dominant species in many cases. And then as we continue up and we get into poorer soils, coarser tills and whatnot, we move into these upper elevation spruce fir forests, and eventually reach, in some cases, an actual alpine zone. And so this is a very nice conceptual figure, but let's look at some actual nice pictures of what these, different forest types look like. And here are some pine, a kind of characteristic white pine super canopy with a subcanopy of hardwood trees that is quite common through a lot of the Adirondacks at those lower elevations. Here's a pitch pine, pine barrens. This is in Clintonville, which is a nature conservancy holding in the eastern Adirondacks. And then as we move into those peatland environments, here's just an example of an open peatland, and you can see here that black spruce, the yellowish individuals out here are larches, and fir and spruce in the forested background here. And this is, an open peatland, but there's also lots of forested peatlands dominated by black spruce again. For those of you who may know him, here's, one of the characteristic native fauna of black spruce bogs in the Adirondacks, Steve Langdon, who I do a lot of research with at Shingle Shanty Nature Preserve on forested bogs and tree encroachment into those bogs and how these trees are growing at their southern range limits. And so if you're interested in any of that, we lots of time for questions and stuff at the end. We then move into, starting to get onto those more well-drained tills, but still at low elevations. And here's some of that, charismatic, characteristic hemlock forest that is present in the Adirondacks, and makes up a dominant part of many areas in the Adirondacks. And one of the things that that we're worried about as the hemlock woolly Adelgid that Jesse's going to talk about so much moves in. And then we can keep moving. Here, my cursor stop into that maple beech birch forest as we're starting to move upward a little in elevation, but still at relatively low elevations. And of course, this is very characteristic. What people know and flock to the Adirondacks in the fall for are those colors of the maple, beech, birch, and scattered other hardwood species with such lovely full fall foliage. As we continue, though, moving up, you start to find these little pockets of unique systems. And for instance, the rocky outcrops that you encounter as you're going at those mid elevations are often dominated by red pine and maybe some serviceberry, some oak, and some aspen. Very different from the surrounding hardwood forest on these rocky, drier, more exposed outcrops. And one of the things I'm particularly interested in is that on some of these, this is around J, there is jack pine, which is a boreal, dominant boreal pine species, but it is at its very southern extent here in the Adirondacks. And it has scattered small individuals, can't even really call them populations, through along some of these ridge tops in the northeastern part of the Adirondacks. So really interesting embedded ecosystems nested along these more general forest types. And then, of course, as we keep moving up, we encounter we move into the spruce fir forest. And what is striking about this forest is that I like to think of, the spruce forest, this spruce and predominantly fir forest at the upper elevations in the Adirondacks, and those low elevations, black spruce forest that I was just showing you, at opposite ends of bookending that hardwood forest, where neither of those environments, whether it's from the high elevation temperature and exposure conditions versus the nutrient poor peatland conditions, and also somewhat temperature driven and growing season driven, but that neither at either end of the spectrum kind of here as we move across these forest types, not ideal environments, not conducive to the deciduous forest that we find in the middle and more of what we could think of as the prime real estate in terms of forest growth and the species that can grow there. And then, of course, as we keep moving up, here's just a shot of the spruce forest, the spruce fir forest, a close-up of I just love the look of those fresh fir cones. And there is still some deciduous species that make it up in or embedded kind of within the spruce fir forest, for birch being one of those, and then mountain ash, which you can see in the background here, is also can be fairly common at these higher elevations. As we move up into the very highest elevations, we start to get into that Krumholtz fir forest, where the dwarf fir, no bigger than shrubs, but can be a century old and only a couple feet high, interspersed with other woody shrub vegetation. And then, of course, we reach the actual tree line in some parts of the Adirondacks, and we can see that Krumholtz like kind of fading out into the actual alpine zones. And so that's just a broad overview of the kind of general forest types that you see across the Adirondacks. But of course, there's a lot more subtle, differences that occur in any given spot on the landscape. And part of my research over the last, I guess 6 or 7 years now, has been looking at how species composition, partly how species composition changes along elevational gradients in the Adirondacks. And so we've been doing this work. We've done this work, myself and many students at this point, on 6 different mountains in the high peaks region of the Adirondacks, as you can see on the map here. And the mountains are Algonquin, Big Slide, Blueberry, Cascade, Gothics, and Lower Wolfjaw. And what we did is that along each of these mountains at 100-meter elevational intervals, we established transects and we sampled the forest composition at each of those elevations. And what we see from that on these 6 mountains is, to some degree, those general patterns that I just talked about being apparent. The yellow lines on each of these mountains, in each of these plots, is balsam fir. On the y-axis, we have elevation. So as we go up on the plot, we're going up in elevation. And the x-axis is the importance value, or this combination of the density, the dominance, and the frequency of that species at that elevation. And so we see the general trend that I was just talking about. Balsam fir and to some degree red spruce is the purple line, increase as you go up into higher elevations. Other species like the striped maple and the red maple are most common at the intermediate elevations. Things like hemlock are most common at the lower elevations. But the other takeaway from this is that each mountain is really unique. And there are big differences in the number of species and the combinations or the assemblage of species, the community composition on each of these mountains. Now, this is the mature tree composition that we sampled on each of these mountains at each of these elevations. But one of the big underlying reasons we were doing this research was to think about how tree species might be responding to climate change. And just a brief aside here for a minute from the forest itself, but thinking about climate change, I just wanted to show some really nice figures from Kurt Steger and others' work. This was published just over a year ago in PLOS One, but clearly showing the red line here is Adirondack temperature, is clearly going up over the last century. Precipitation is also going up over the past century. So it's getting warmer and it's getting wetter. Kurt and his collaborators also really nicely showed how this correlates with earlier thaws and later freezes, and the asterisks along the top here are years in which Lake Champlain did not completely freeze over. Okay, and so you can see not many asterisks here in the early part of the 20th century. Lake Champlain was predominantly frozen every year, but as we move into the later part of the 20th century and now the 21st, we see asterisks almost every year. Lake Champlain is rarely freezing at this point, a clear sign of those warming temperatures. And what this means that, in terms of how it's important to the tree species and our forests, is that summers, here are summers today, are getting warmer. These are B1 and A2 are two different climate change emission scenarios, A2 being the more extreme. But you can see the peak of the plot is going up. It's getting warmer, but summers are also getting longer. Okay, we're getting a broader graph, broader distribution. Okay, and so summer is encroaching into both spring and fall. And conversely to summers getting warmer and longer, winters are getting shorter. Winters are also getting warmer. You can see the dip here is not nearly as much as it is currently. So winter temperatures aren't as low, and winter is getting shorter. And so does this matter to our tree species? Well, what we did along those same transects on those 6 mountains was not just measure the mature trees, but we sampled the sapling trees as well of each species. And that allows us to see what maybe is happening with the next generation, the trees that are going to become the forest canopy, are going to replace the current trees. And if the sapling distribution is skewed higher than the mature tree distribution, that would suggest that that species is moving up the mountain in response maybe to climate change. If the sapling distribution is lower down in elevation, skewed to lower elevations than the adult distribution, that would suggest that the tree species is moving down the mountain. And if the distributions line up, it would mean that the species isn't really responding to any factor, whatever that might be, and is just kind of staying put in its current range. And what we're looking at here is kind of a summary of those results of whether or not the saplings were higher or lower or not different at all from the adult distributions summarized across the 6 mountains for the 5 species that we had enough data to do the statistical analysis on. And the takeaway from this is that for balsam fir, striped maple, sugar maple, and red spruce, there was no clear directional pattern. On some mountains, those species were moving down a little bit. On some, they were moving up. On some, they weren't moving at all. It was a real mixed bag of response between the sapling and the adult frequencies. American beech was the only species that showed a clear directional response across all 6 of the mountains, with it moving clearly going high, the saplings being higher up the mountain than the adult individuals. And these results both corroborate and differ slightly from previous work done by Jay Wasson and Martin Dovchak out of ESF. This was Jay Wasson's PhD, part of his PhD work, where he looked at 12 mountains doing the same type of work, and my study design is based off of Jay's. He looked at 12 mountains across the Northeast. Not a couple of them were in the Adirondacks, but also in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And he showed the exact same very clear upward response from American beech. He showed no response with balsam fir, no significant response. He found a significant downward trend in both sugar maple and red spruce, which was contrary to what we found, where there was no clear directional trend. But overall, the combination of our results with his, and now more work that's been done out of the Dovchak lab, more recently Jordan Torville has been doing some of this work, shows that mountains are responding to potential, changes in different environmental factors and maybe anthropogenic factors as well in very different and unique ways. And to dig into that a little bit more, just thinking about our response of red spruce moving up the mountain, in some cases down in others, that red spruce is a really interesting species in the Adirondacks in that its climatic niche space runs from the lowest elevations to the highest. It can grow, do just fine across the entire elevational gradient. But it was driven out of its highest elevations over the last middle to late 20th century due to acid deposition at the high elevations. It was also pushed upward out of its lowland habitats due to mostly to logging in the early part of the 20th century. And so it seems like it's expanding back out into what was its historical, into its historical range. In different ways on different mountains. Striped and sugar maples, which we also found to have no clear directional movement, upslope recruitment for seedlings and then saplings for those species is probably hindered to a large degree by soil type. The coarse tills found predominantly at upper elevations are not conducive for these species to grow on. Also, seed predation or herbivory at upper elevations of these species has been shown to be a major problem in terms of their ability to recruit. Work done by Mark Veland out of University of Sherbrooke and Jordan at ESF, I already mentioned. Jordan also looked at mycorrhizal associations and found that might be hindering upslope movement of a lot of these deciduous species as well. The fungal community being an important part of the ability of these species to thrive. If climate conditions are conducive to their moving upslope, other things like that not. Downslope recruitment of sugar maple in particular is potentially being hindered by red spruce and balsam fir moving back into those areas that have been lost to logging. And then, of course, American beech, like I already said, was the one clear species that was moving unified in how it was moving upslope. And this is almost, completely due to extensive root suckering as a response to beech bark disease, which is troublesome in terms of thinking about our future forests, because many of these trees are not going to become part of the mature canopy eventual forest. They're going to be infected by beech bark disease in the kind of sapling stage, and many of them are going to most of them are not going to potentially make it to the adult canopy positions that they have historically occupied. Beech is also, as I'll touch on again in a second, very shade tolerant and hinders other species recruitment, not just through its heavy shading, but because of interactions with deer herbivory as well, where deer avoid beech to a large degree. It's not a favored browse species, and so they eat other things. They leave the beech. The beech inhibits regeneration of other species, and so on and so on. And so, just to keep moving along, climate by itself doesn't seem to be affecting forest health in direct ways, at least not yet. And for many of the species that we find in the Adirondacks, that will probably continue to be the case for a very long time, where most of these species grow very well in warmer climates to the south of here, and warming might not adversely affect them. It's those boreal species that we might be more worried about from direct climate effects. But we also need to be very cognizant of other things affecting our forest health. Herbivory white-tailed deer, which I just mentioned, are having big impacts on forest regeneration, not just in the Adirondacks, but across all of eastern North America. Invasive species are a major problem, not so much with canopy tree species, but with the shrub and understory layers. But that has direct implications on then the ability for canopy tree species to regenerate. Pathogens and pests, which I'm not going to say too much more about because Jesse's going to take that up. And then, of course, climate is an issue. And even if it's not so much a direct issue in a lot of our tree species, the indirect effects that climate is having on allowing or providing the conditions for invasive species and pathogens and pests to move in and affect our forests is by all means a major concern. Other indirect effects of climate are increased risk from extreme weather events. Last summer, the amount of flooding through northern New York was, pretty monumental. And that is going to lead to, potentially lead to a lot more landslides, especially in high elevation areas. And then also windstorms are becoming more prevalent as well. All of this is going to impact forest health, regeneration, and the forest structure and composition. The last thing that I want to do is kind of touch on these two focal species just for a minute of American beech and then hemlock in a minute. And I wanted to start thinking about each of these tree species with just the, first of all, beech, with this quote from Petey's 1950 publication on tree species of North America. And he just writes in such beautiful poetic language. Beech is, in almost any landscape where it appears, the finest tree to be seen. There are many taller trees and many that attain to moments of showier glory, like the sugar maple, an autumnal coloration, or a dogwood starred with snowy blossoms. But taken in all seasons and judged by all that makes a tree noble, strength combined with grace, balance, longevity, hardiness, health, the beech is all that we want a tree to be. And I just think that really sums up, how beautiful and wonderful beech, American beech can be. And the problem with our beech forests has become that beech, for the most part, no longer looks like this. It looks more like, where did my cursor go? Why? Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, now I've jumped way ahead. It looks more like this, sorry about that, infected by beech bark disease, and predominantly across the Adirondacks. It's hard to find a beech that looks like this. They almost all look like this. And now we have this new added issue of beech leaf disease, which is potentially even more of a threat to our beech forests. And so American beech, just very quickly, as I've already said, is highly abundant across the Adirondacks. It's a really important species for wildlife as a food source, especially during masting years. The beech nuts are used by many species. It's also, thinking about the ecology of the species, highly shade tolerant, which means, as I said, it can regenerate in its own shade, but it inhibits a lot of other species. And beech bark disease has contributed to a decrease in large trees and an increase in clonal thickets. Beech reproduces asexually. It sends up root suckers that are genetic clones of itself, which means that all of these root suckers are genetically disposed to beech bark disease in the exact same way that the parent tree was. And we're getting these thickets of beech saplings, but then they get infected and they don't necessarily, like I said, move into that canopy stage of the forest, which is such an important part. A caveat to that is maybe some, potentially good news in terms of beech bark disease, but work done by McNulty, Stacy McNulty and John Cale in Huntington Forest and others has shown that infected trees, depending on the level of initial infestation, but infected trees potentially do persist for decades, and so they remain compositional and structural part of the forest, even if they aren't very healthy. But I guess the new issue with that is that beech leaf disease is potentially going to really change, maybe the way that these trees persist, and change even more so the structure and composition of these beech forests. Hemlock, again, a quote from Petey, because I can't resist. Approaching such a noble tree, you think dark, almost black, because the needles on the upper side are indeed a lustrous deep blue-green. Yet when you lunch on the rock that is almost surely to be found at its feet, or you settle your back into the buttress of the bole and look up under the boughs, their shade seems silvery. Soon even talk of the tree itself is silenced by it, and you fall to listening. When the wind lifts up hemlock's voice, it is no roaring like the pines, no keening like the spruces. The hemlock whistles softly to itself. It sees its long limber boughs and lets them drop again with a sigh, not sorrowful, but letting fall tranquility upon us. And hemlock, like I said, and Jesse's going to talk lots about, and Tammara as well, is a really important species through many of these lowland, low elevation areas of the Adirondack forest. It is also a highly shade-tolerant species. It has a very dense canopy. And what this means, importantly, is that it's very low light penetration. And so a lot of species cannot grow in the understory below a hemlock canopy. It also affects the temperature of the forest floor, everything from the microbial community to the understory and shrub layers. Very slow litter decomposition, which affects nutrient cycling, carbon flux, and organic matter accumulation. And so the ecosystem services and processes in hemlock forests are very different from other forest types within the Adirondack region. And hemlock woolly adelgid, moving into the Adirondacks, and I'm not going to talk too much about that because that's what Jesse's going to talk about, but potentially has very profound impacts. And here's just an example of the way that the infestation of hemlock woolly adelgid. This is data from Harvard Forest in Massachusetts. But after the year of infestation of the woolly adelgid, the hemlock forest productivity, net ecosystem productivity in terms of carbon sequestration per year went from being a carbon sink above zero to being a carbon source within less than a decade. And so really profound implications of losing hemlock from our forests from a very basic ecosystem services level. And that's all I'm going to say about that. I think I've already gone way over time, so sorry about that, Sean. But I guess we'll open it up to any questions if we still have time for that. I can't hear you, Sean.
Sorry about that. How's that? Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate it. Yeah, we definitely have time for some chat questions. Let's see what we have. We've got a lot of snow reports in here. So, Mark, is there any research being done to mitigate against beech bark disease?
Oh, um, I'm not sure on actual research being done to mitigate beech bark disease. There's lots of research being done into the implication that I'm familiar with on the implications of beech bark disease on forest health and services, ecosystem services, and that side of thing, and like the work I showed from McNulty and Kale and others in Huntington Forest, lots of work being done on that sort of thing. In terms of actually trying to control beech bark disease, I I'm just speaking from my own opinion, but I feel that sadly, that ship may have sailed. But it is, possible to locate individuals that do appear to have resistance to the disease. The problem is that those individuals aren't the ones that then, are vigorously, producing root suckers and these thickets of susceptible beech. But in terms of research on mitigation itself, I'm not familiar with that side of things. Sorry, that was a long rambling answer to kind of I don't know.
It's okay. And this is actually a question for me. We have this question a few times in the chat, so I'll just address it quickly now. People are asking if this a recording of this webinar will be available, and the answer is yes. It will be available on APIPP's YouTube channel. If you're registered for this webinar, I do send out a follow-up email. So as soon as I can get the recording from Zoom, and then as quickly as it can upload on YouTube, it'll be available. Usually that's within about 24 hours or so. And I will send an email to anyone who's registered with the link for that. But if for some reason you're not on that list, you could just check our YouTube channel. I'd say sometime maybe tomorrow afternoon, and it will be available. Mark, we do have a couple more for you. Is it wise to remove the infected beech trees? And I believe this is related to beech bark disease.
Yeah, I think in many cases, removing those trees, the issue becomes is that the fungus can and insect, it's got a two-pronged disease. The introduced insect predisposes the tree is our thinking about this, and then the fungus moves in the second stage. Both can live on in the stand on other species that they don't have the same detrimental effect on for quite long periods of time, kind of waiting for that next generation of beech to come back. Having said that, though, yeah, removing infected beech is one way to try to limit the spread of it.
Great, and here's one that's related. How does beech bark disease affect beech nut production? And this person also asked about removing beech trees, which you just addressed.
Right. My understanding is that the trees, for the most part, are still, as long as they're, not being killed, and like I showed, the work is showing that they can persist for some time, is that they are still producing, nut crops and large ones during masting years. That doesn't seem to have been that affected. There might be some other research that I haven't seen on that shows differently, but not that I'm aware of.
Great, we have two more for you. One on beech, we'll stick with that, and then another one on hemlock. Was the increase in beech growth upslope due to suckering alone, or was there any natural reseeding from beech nuts?
That's a really great and interesting question, and something that we'd really like to figure out. It appear the general thinking is that it is mostly clonal, spread upslope, but doing some genetic work and figuring out how trees are related to each other would really, help with figuring that out for sure. And right now, I think we don't know the answer to that.
All right, we'll give you one more. Beech just came in, and it's actually just kind of related to what you just said. Given the mode of reproduction for beech trees, what is the outlook for genetically resistant trees to evolve?
Yeah, I mean, that just gets really hard because it clonally reproduces so vigorously, and even more so when it's infected, which just perpetuates the trees that are predisposed to the disease. And so I think it's very difficult, given that for us, that we're going to see large scale natural, move towards adaptation that take towards selection for trees that are resistant.
All right, let's grab this hemlock question here. Why is hemlock recruitment typically so poor when compared to other climax forest species?
Oh, that's a really good question as well. Um, you know, it's just, I think I don't have a really good good answer for that without digging into the literature more. I don't think, but I think that, yeah, I'm not, that's a tough question that I don't have a good answer for. Sorry.
That's okay. And we're just going to sneak this one in because I think it'll be a quick one. Is there any concern about burning this wood in indoor fireplaces? And then we'll move on after this.
About burning the hemlock or the,
Yeah, I'm assuming it's from Julia. I'm guessing she means beech and or hemlock. Yeah, beech. She says beech.
oh, not that I'm aware. Is that related to like the just the fungus and any like residue that's going to,
Yeah, the fungus. It
yeah,
is. I guess is there any risk of spreading it by burning it, or is there any distribution method that could happen because of burning it?
not that I'm aware of, but again, a good, yeah, interesting question that I'm not something I'd ever thought of. Maybe someone else knows an answer to that.
Great. How about cutting it or moving it?
I think that those are always, like concerns. But the fungus, like I said, you need both the scale insect and the fungal pathogen to really, to really to have this detrimental effect on the tree. And so moving both of those, but also at this point, beech bark disease is pretty much, prevalent across the entire range of beech. And so there are very few areas where it's not just already there, sadly.
Yeah, and it is worth noting that New York State does have a don't move firewood policy of not moving firewood within a 50-mile radius. We ask people to just move it as little as possible,
Yeah. That's just always good practice. Yeah.
which is always a good practice. Yes.
Yeah.
All right, really great questions. It's nice to have such an engaged and interested audience. So thank you, Mark. Let's move on to Jesse now. Jesse, if you want to request control of my screen, and we'll get going. Thank you. Okay, Jesse, you should be good to go.
All right, Sean, thank you. Yeah, I'll start out just by saying, yeah, don't move firewood. I've got a platform to talk about here briefly. So yeah, don't. Smoky's has a firewood policy. So just overall good forest health practices. We try to relay the message. Don't bring your firewood to the Smokies. There are other things that could be vectored with that. But also, let me see if I'm moving through presentation here.
Try clicking your screen. Yeah, there you go.
There you go. All right. Sean, thanks again. Mark, way to bring a tear to my eye by quoting Donald Colrose Petey. I was going to be a little bit more scientific on this, but that brings out some passion. And that's a little bit about what I'm going to talk about as well. So there was a lot of similarities when Mark was talking about the Adirondacks. I haven't been there. Again, I've been in the Smokies for 20 years. Vegetation management, a lot of the forest pests, pathogens, invasive species that we work on here in the Smokies. But what I really want to talk about, is really our hemlock conservation program. Some of the similarities I could see that Mark was talking about with the Smokies, elevations that we have from 800 feet up to 1,000 feet, even into the spruce fir forest. Also, the aspects of we are getting wetter and warmer as well. It's interesting to see that as well with some of your data. However, one thing that we've seen with that is we've also had some of the extremes. We've had some of the most extreme droughts and how those tie in, link in to forest health with invasive species and pathogens. We've seen it all. So I want to kind of lay that out for you, and possibly what to expect and more importantly, what you can do. I know Tammara is going to come in after me and talk a little bit more about that, but really I see the Park Service moving more to what would be called proactive stewardship. And really, talk about a little bit of this poster, and it gets into that because a lot of times You know, we hear so much about these invasive species moving in, and it's like a monster, right? This was a poster, kind of a spoof put out by our friends group almost 20 years ago when we were first facing hemlock woolly adelgid, and we knew what it could do. So really, you know, there is an aspect of it's a monster. You know, as you have you know, the old Godzilla movies, but you know, there is hope. I'm going to talk about that. You know, other agencies, when you see where hemlock is distributed across the country and these other states and agencies that are dealing with this, they all have these same questions. They're going through the same questions and down the same path that you are. You've got a lot of great folks in your state working on this. They're going to help get the best outcome. And there is, again, I think when people have been familiar with emerald ash borer, that was just so fast, rapid, violent. You know, if they experience that first, you know, they hear about HWA and they kind of throw up their hands. But I really want to talk about what we've been able to accomplish. And really, the two biggest questions I always get now on the trail from visitors that still care so much about this and still support us is, how are the hemlocks doing, right? And are the beetles working? That's the biological control that we've been able to establish in the forest. So this map kind of lays out again, in the green is the distribution of eastern hemlock with the decadal advance of HWA, first discovered 1951, Richmond, Virginia. It was imported by a couple that wanted to have the novelty of having western hemlocks in their garden. Folks are never happy with what they have locally, so you can see it was slow advance through the decades. And in the 80s, really kind of started jumping out and becoming a concern. Massive push into the south, and that's what we really experienced. That's why so many people are interested in how the Smokies has been able to really work with Adelgid. And then also, you know, the cold's not going to keep it at bay forever. We do see movement north now into Canada, also into possible warmer areas in Michigan here along the lake effect, and that's what you're seeing. So it is evolving, moving further north, and again with the questions of climate change, a warming climate, that is a specter. So as Mark mentioned, hemlock's foundational tree species. I got this photograph of a tree on Alum Cave Trail. These trees live 300-400 up to 500 years old in the Smokies. Again, that's not old when you think about some of the western evergreens, but again, these trees are almost pre-Columbian. They're a cultural treasure, not just an ecological resource. But they're disappearing on the landscape due to HWA. Here's the Adelgid here with its long stylet. Might be faded out for you on the photo, hopefully not, but they insert that stylet. It's up to 3-4 times their body length into a needle, and then they basically produce needle loss. The tree starves. But really what's important to note, again, it's an exotic invasive species with no natural checks on population. That's the aspect of invasives. And this is a photo from Chimney Tops area in the Smokies, you know, after the first initial wave of Adelgid came through. So old growth forest, right? Also, most shade tolerant tree in the east, most shade tolerant conifer, most people are familiar with are pines. We only have 5 pine species, but they're on drier, sandier slopes. But, you know, these hemlocks, we know moderate extreme temperatures, hydrologic processes as well. Soil moisture is key. And they've got their associated biodiversity. That's terrestrial and aquatic. And we know that we're going to be losing that. So not just losing these trees. And of interest is they're found as a component in most all forest types in the Smokies. There's a little aspect even of the spruce fir where you have the hemlock all the way up to 5,000, 5,500 feet in the Smokies that we've been able to protect. So there's the freshly shorn Adelgid. You can note its stylet wrapped around below it here. What's key for land managers and the public as well is initial detection is very difficult in low numbers. They're typically found higher up in the canopy. Again, mortality in as little as 3 to 5 years, depending on multiple factors. Highly important is seedlings to old growth hosts, right? So they can kill your old growth trees, even though your trees might be smaller, more weathered in some of the Adirondack forests. I would assume, Mark could speak to this, assume that some of those are definitely old growth, 200, 300, 400-year-old trees. So also the seedling though. So there's the aspect of that ecological extinction on the landscape. You could still have one in someone's backyard, but it's not performing the vital environmental services that we discussed. And so what's important with this photo as well is first detected in 2002 in the Smokies. And then there's a picture that I took in 2007 from Allen Cave Trail. This is going up Sugarlands Valley to Klingman's Dome, if y'all have ever been to the Smokies. These are all old growth trees, all old growth hemlock trees that really with, I guess, the backdrop of the deciduous forest leafing up in the spring. This is when we started getting calls. This is when the superintendent's phones was starting to ring. Hey, what's happening to these trees? Well, we were telling folks about this, 2 decades prior, scouting to these areas, trying to locate and highlight areas that we can make an impact. A lot of this terrain here is extreme, dangerous for individuals to be in. So we really focused along the roadways, parking lots, along this one valley. Again, it's more of a watershed by watershed infestation that gets into more of the monitoring. So there's lots of valleys in the Smokies that we were able to get to in time. But again, you think about without intervention, and that's really what I'm here to talk about today, is without intervention, there's the high probability of ecological extinction. So massive impact that we knew was on the way, potential to visitor use, safety, ecological function. So what are we going to do? Adirondacks with its millions of acres, how do you highlight, prioritize those areas? And we kind of worked on, with Park Service mission, definitely visitor use, but then next on to it, ecological function as well in the landscape. So we utilize in our approach integrated pest management. And the 5 principles to really take home and to think about is you're never going to eradicate. We don't assume that we're going to eradicate all Adelgid, right? So overuse of pesticides can lead to some issues as well. We're all familiar with that in the past with some of Rachel Carson's work as well. So we want to put that into our toolbox and think about that. Ecosystem is the management unit. We're thinking about the life cycles, and we're thinking about predators that we might be able to utilize, a natural predator-prey balance with that maximizing natural controls. Also, this is a good one, a question I always get. Any action can have unforeseen and undesired consequences. So if we're utilizing some of these stopgap measures with pesticides and or biocontrols, I don't want to be pinned as the next guy who really, started the next kudzu infestation, or you talk about cane toad. So we're really, the Park Service and other agencies, we're highly cognizant of that, and also using an interdisciplinary approach to pest management, really utilizing the research from the universities, working with other agencies. And, I've been fortunate enough to be at some interagency meetings with Tammara, and that's that sharing that we're all doing, that we're learning what's actually possible. Oh, blasted through a couple of them there. Okay, so active suppression, again, to think about this as a remedial stopgap, is a treatment of these hemlock trees. The Adelgid takes very, very minute parts per million of the active ingredients to control it and actually save these trees, which we've treated over 300,000 trees throughout the Smokies on 15,000 acres. And again, these are, choice areas, picnic areas, campgrounds. One thing I'd like to highlight, again, as other agencies have gone through this, Ohio had a state park It was Ash Cave, an old man cave. There's some of these beautiful old growth hemlocks in these sandstone canyons with these waterfalls. And, they know they've got 1 million visitors a year visiting some of these areas. And they know they know the number of hemlocks they've got there. It was a no-brainer for them to actually do something. If they hadn't have done anything, all those trees would be gone. And they've got a data sheet now with all their GPS points, and we're able to get ahead of this thing and save those trees in time, and they look like superheroes. So again, to think of this as just a stopgap as that initial wave of Adelgid rolls through the area. We know where we are on the landscape. Now with GIS, we're able to pinpoint these trees. They're measured, marked, and there's been some tremendous work from volunteer groups in many states that have been able to get out and organize to get these areas treated in time, and those trees look phenomenal. Crown monitoring for efficacy of our treatments over the years. This is pulled from multiple years throughout the park. So again, our treated trees, these, as we call them, conservation areas. So, back to the other photo again, Henwallow West, we have over 450 conservation areas. Henwallow West is an area of about 50 acres. Every tree there pointed. We know where those areas are. And in monitoring those, and we're looking at crown health, there's a lot that goes into that. But overall, is that tree vigorous, right? So vigor 1 is what you'd expect, a beautiful, healthy hemlock tree. Vigor 5 is a dead tree. There's even a vigor 6, which is dead and on the ground, which actually happens about 10 years after infestation and then mortality. So treated trees throughout the park compared with untreated trees. So we know, one, it helps us to actually get out on the landscape and scout for other treated areas, but also we know we're having a big impact. We're making a difference on the landscape. So also with utilizing integrated pest management in our monitoring system, we really have been able to, I'm really proud of the work we've been able to do in the park to determine absolute lowest levels of some of these dosages that we're needing to treat trees. Again, the chemical companies, they give you a broad range, and yeah, they want you to use as much as you possibly can, but we want to get that. We don't want any of those, non-target impacts in the canopy, in the soil, in the stream system. So we've done the work. We've gotten up into the canopy, taken samples on 150-foot tall trees all the way through, and gotten more of an appropriate dosing rate where we can reduce that amount of chemical on the landscape, understanding as well that we're moving forward, no observable impacts, no negative effects on water quality and sensitive aquatic organisms. So that was really some phenomenal work that we've been able to accomplish here as well. And we're always adjusting that with new research. So principle number 3, maximizing natural controls with integrated pest management. And really that's all about biocontrol. I think, again, seeing is believing. So I'm going to highlight 4 species here. Sasagus skimnus, Laricobius nigrinus, Laricobius osacensis, Skimnus cariniferum. We just say LO, LN, ST because we can't really want to spit all that out in once. But we know that we've got, especially with these Laricobius species, nigrinus from the Pacific Northwest, and osacensis from the area where our Adelgid is from in Japan, near Osaka, right? So we have the predators, we have that natural control now on the landscape. And the way I like to highlight that to the public and just for our own understanding is we're looking for a natural predator-prey relationship. And a classic example was snowshoe rabbit, Canada lynx. To observe that predators are really keeping those pest populations in check. Yep, there you go. So we've got some bobcats, especially with these Laricobius species on the landscape now. They're growing in number. Of interest, and you can pull this from information on the web. Virginia Tech's done a lot of great work. Is our HWA, the life cycle? It's really odd. It's an odd one. We really only deal with these on on hemlock here in North America. In Japan, there's 3 other generations where they go and progress through to sexual reproduction. But in North America, we just have these, this is kind of like an extant display here of these 2 generations with cystins and the progrediens. So really, it's important to know that they're all female. They're cloned, which is kind of an odd one as well. But you get this cycling back. So we work with this life cycle in how we treat and how we also think about biocontrol as well. This wing stage as well is, again, it's meant to fly away onto spruce. They're unable to host on our spruce. Luckily, I think I've got a photo here of the really weird. Oh yeah, in Japan they have this really odd gall. They call it, I guess, colloquially, they call it like a dragon's egg. Somehow, this wing form hatches out of here and cycles back to hemlock. So these wing forms, sexupari, as they're called, like a tiny cicada. If you have cicadas there as well, so of interest. But again, this is what we're after. Again, I want to highlight that's the term natural predator-prey relationship. We're not treating these trees forever. There's an initial wave that's a violent first wave of Adelgid, but as that goes through, those populations of Adelgid are going to be lower. Again, you're going to be losing hemlock every cycle of Adelgid as it grows on the landscape and then crashes again. So time really is critical, especially at first. So I wanted to highlight the veg crew and the Smokies here. This is actually our crew up. We're clearing off one of our high elevation grassy balds. This is Andrew's bald. We were all in a photo together though. So, this is the team that's able to get out on the landscape with summer interns as well, treating trees throughout the park. And, we treat, other than the other work that we're doing with restoration and invasive plant removal throughout the park, we're treating up to 30, 40,000 trees a year. So it is well attainable. Wanted to highlight some of the life cycles here. Again, back to the cystins and the progrediens. Just thought you might find this of interest. And here's the Laricobius beetle that's actually an adult form in the ground. And then when the Adelgid really breaks estivation and starts putting on wool, that's when we're able to go out and find beetles, collect them if needed, move them around. We know we're right about here where they're starting to lay eggs and then the larvae drop off. So there's a little bit, if you notice, there's a little lag on this progrediens generation. And this is the headache with resource managers, is we understand what we're not getting a complete knockdown on this tail end of this generation, but there is work being done on that. So really what we're out doing on the landscape is we're just looking for presence and absence. We want to know where we have predators, maybe also finding their densities as well. And that helps us determine where to treat, where not to treat, if needed, maybe where to bolster their numbers as well, and what's happening. And again, it's a dynamic system. There's a Laricobius beetle in a beech sheet, right? Super tiny. They're laying, 30 to 60 eggs per, along one per ovisac. The Adelgids have roughly 30 to 60 eggs in their ovisac. So those larvae are they're hatching out and consuming 5 to 6 ovisacs. So it's a game of numbers. It's a game of numbers. When you do catch one, there's a little, it's so awesome to actually, if we're determining presence and absence, we know we've got presence there. We're going to let that gal climb back up on that branch and crawl away, and you see them latch onto a Adelgid, you're pretty pumped about something like that on the landscape. So seeing that happen, there she goes. So we're looking for wool damage later on in the winter. We know we've had larvae that are in there. These might be areas that we want to sample that site for densities. So we're working with Virginia Tech on the really just the timing of the year to do that. Really, if it's one great time to do that is when we have the red bud blooming. Mark, I'm not sure if you got red buds up in there, but that's really kind of a good indicator of when to go out and do some of these collections. And then not to bore you with what's going on here, but we're looking at the ratio of the number of larvae per HWA ovisacs, and that gives us we know a certain ratio is going to reduce our pergridians and the eggs. And, also to think about with the, with some of the cold snaps that we've had as well now, even though Adelgid is changing, evolving, becoming more cold tolerant, it does help occasionally, and we play that into the aspects of our work. We have conservation areas at up to 5,000 feet. So with the temps that I know we got down to the last couple of days of -10, that's really going to help us out a lot. Pretty simple. Just call these bucket drops, where we're looking at the number of larvae that are dropping off. We can actually send those off to determine which species they are, whether it's nigrinus or osicensis. They do not interbreed, but we send those off to Virginia Tech. They're able to help us out as we're planning for the year. Yeah, here's a good example of some of the bouquets that we build of hemlock. And again, super simple to set these up in a lab, and some of the larvae that we're able to take up and drop off into those buckets gives us a number. But really, again, I think a big message that I've got is it's not just you, it's all these other agencies. So there is a HWA predator database that Virginia has set up that we're all feeding into, and this highlights beetle release numbers, predators, and also monitoring of that from North Georgia all the way into Canada now. I can see New York area here. Yeah, not seeing a lot. Well, again, this is a little bit old. This is a dated photo, so maybe see more from Adirondacks here at some point. I know Tammara is going to be getting into a little bit more of that, but we know, especially with a little close up of the Smokies here. So roughly, here's Oak Ridge and Knoxville. So a lot of these points are falling within the Smokies, and these are again those predator release sites, and want to kind of zoom in even on those even more. So what I really like and what's really encouraging is we're finding those predator beetles in untreated hemlock stands up to 2 miles away, right? So that's where we're at. We know they're doing something that really they're impacting the populations. And again, with the treatments that we've got that we're stretching out over many years, and very cost effective. It's easy for me to relay this information to the superintendent and management team that, hey, this is of value. So is this going to be enough? If we have these bobcats on the landscape, is that going to be enough? Well, we talk about bracketing pergridians, and that's having more than one predator. As we know, snowshoe hares or rabbits are kept down not just by bobcats, but also other predators as well, that are needed at different times of the year. And then the newest one on the landscape that Cornell's highly involved with as well is Leucotraxis argenticollis, known as silver fly, tiny fly, fruit fly size. Again, when you see this thing, you're like, how can a little tiny, this little tiny fly do something? But if you think about the numbers that can be generated rapidly from some of these species, we do understand that Leucotraxis, along with Laricobius, are really pulling about 80 to 90% of the weight on biocontrol in the native lands of Japan. So, is this all worth it? I used to honestly, I know a lot of you calling on here, got the passion and understand that that's really what's needed. And there's more to it than just the bottom line. And I used to think, well, we've spent some money here on this, is it worth it? Or am I almost going to be embarrassed to talk to the public about, the numbers that we've spent on these? But if you think about the environmental services that were mentioned, those are priceless. And getting back to the bottom line on this, we know just from some of the stories in the park, Parsons Branch Road, out of Cades Cove, if you've ever been there, one of the most visited areas in the park or any park service unit in the country. there were only 1,700 hazard trees that were found. A majority of those were all eastern hemlock. We were unable to get to in time. They even mentioned the cost on the contract for removal, right? So what the park decided to do, it was their take, but they just closed the road and couldn't get things rolling there for up to 6 years. So it stayed closed for 6 years as half of these trees fell down, and then they had to get in when they're real dangerous and difficult to work on once they're deteriorating and falling apart. So again, choose your areas wisely, get to them in time, and you'll be feeling a lot better about what you've done. So, that's kind of what, just one aspect of the, I guess, the cost and the value of what we choose to do. But really, entrance road to the Smokies, right out of Gatlinburg here, streets lined with hemlock trees. We've got an actual in our database. This is one conservation area here. We're able to outline, the treatment cost on that area, if, when it's needed, if it's needed again, I guess. But again, we're probably going to have HWA on the landscape permanently. It's something to think about. We'll have that in the tolerable numbers. That's the word, really, is we want to make it tolerable for the hemlock trees, and they can manage, a low levels of Adelgid, not 3 Adelgid on every needle. And that's what we were seeing early on. But really, I think one of the big values that we have, and also the research to back that up and that we're seeing, is that the biggest, a highlight for treating and saving these trees is some of the work done by Tony's in 2016. They got back to hemlock forest post, so there was a pre-Adelgid infestation and also post, and they looked at these neotropical migrants, so migrant birds like black-burnian warbler, and they found with hemlock loss, and this is what we see on the landscape, that there's really a homogenization of the forest, and meaning they're all becoming more, you get a lot more maple and white pine, and you lose that diversity, and then with that you lose resiliency. We hear that word a lot in resource management now, but they did find that keeping just some areas, even up to, I believe it's 5 acres, small acreage on the landscape, it's beneficial for these species. So these neotropical migrants are looking for hemlock forest when they move north in the spring, and those are the species that we're losing when we lose hemlock. And also, this is a big question with Smokies being the salamander capital of the world. What's happening with the salamanders? Are some of these treatments are they negatively impacting salamanders? Well, the work that we've done coming back in is no, there are no non-target impacts that we're seeing with the terrestrial species as well. And in fact, there's a positive correlation with salamanders and hemlock forest, not just with hemlock forest, but with hemlock trees. We have positive correlation with the distance. As you get closer to some of these larger trees, more likely to find salamanders in those areas. And without that soil moisture and that beneficial hemlock forest, we're going to be losing those. So something to weigh in. So really on to the future for the Smokies is detailed monitoring to look at tree crown health along with HWA populations. This is a really odd contraption that would actually collect the silver fly in the top and the Laricobius in the bottom. So this is some of our monitoring that we are getting into now, more detailed monitoring, and that's key. Again, not the treatments on the landscape, but that's definitely needed at first. And I always like to point out that this is a photo of the hemlock cone with the winged seed, the Tammara, that we've got that can fly for miles in a wind, and then also they're in every major watershed. We've been able to protect canopy, old growth hemlock trees. We've got, here's the picture of Laricobius larvae, Osicensis larvae, opening up an Adelgid oversac. So we've got the trees on the landscape. That's our I guess restoration. I'm always asked, what about our restoration? Well, we have the trees on the landscape producing seed. We might look at some plantings in some areas at some point in the future. And now we have beetles on the landscape, growing in population, growing on the landscape. So again, very hopeful. And I guess the outlook maybe 10, 15 years ago was not as bright as it is now, at least with hemlock woolly adelgid. So with that, Sean, I believe it'd take questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Jesse. Much appreciated. We do have a few questions here in the chat. We'll start with if you are not expecting to completely eradicate HWA with IPM, how do we expect to keep HWA from spreading?
Well, that's a good question. So I think HWA will continue to spread. I think one thing to consider is that there's a question earlier, and other agencies have approached it where they choose an eradication or quote sanitation aspect at first, and that could be of value in certain areas where they will either treat and or remove every tree that they find with adelgid. However, we found in the Smokies that it was pretty much ubiquitous once you start looking around. It can be wind blown. It's carried by some of those new tropical migrants. So the goal is to keep it tolerable. And we do see now in quite a few areas, low numbers of adelgid, healthy hemlock trees. We're really just trying to put the numbers on what's going on the landscape. We really don't see that tidal wave, that tsunami of adelgid wave ever coming back like it did at first. That was coupled with a drought of 2006 and 7 that was devastating in the park. So I hope that answered your question.
And Tammara did chime in on this one, but Jesse, I figured I'd give you a chance to comment too. Do the hemlock trees need subsequent treatments, and if so, how often?
So they do, and again, that's really dependent on monitoring and adelgid populations. We say that trees can die in as little as 3 to 5 years, but how infested are they, right? The treatments last up to 7 years. I hope I highlighted on our presentation the treatment cost can be 10 cents. Now, this is chemical cost, 10 cents per inch of diameter, meaning, close to a 1 foot diameter tree would be about $1. But again, that could be stretched out over, think about it, over 7 years. And what would the adelgid population be after 7 years? Are you as an agency prepared to monitor those sites more intricately and stretch that out even longer? So yeah, currently, we can be on a 7-year rotation. But again, when I look at campgrounds, I've got campgrounds with 60 trees that are, 16 inches in diameter. I can explain to the administrative, to the superintendent, that's chemical costs can be $20, $40 a year. That's cheaper than taking the trash out for 1 week, right?
Jesse, you mentioned hemlock conservation areas. Are these formally established areas, such as mapped and regularly monitored? And if so, how do you decide which area is rated high enough to be considered a conservation area?
Yeah, that's the question that every agency is going to be that they roll through, and there's a lot of discussion on which areas to prioritize. We did ground truthing prior to, in the 90s, prior to a lot of the better technologies that we have now with infrared aerial imagery, but we knew where some of our choice, again, with the Park Service's mission, visitor protection, choice trailheads, picnic areas, and also old growth stands that were, again, you're talking about people getting there that are easily accessible.
You spoke of the predator-prey equilibrium as a goal. How far away is that from being achieved? And it says, asked differently, when might it be possible to phase out chemical treatments?
Well, we're reducing chemical treatments now. So, phasing is a process that's going on. We're stretching that out from originally recommendations were every 2 to 3 years. We're at 7, even experimentally to 10. Where are we in that natural predator-prey balance? That's what's really a lot of research is being done on that, not just in the Smokies, but throughout the hemlock distribution. So, could we be there in some form or fashion, some extent, in areas now? Possibly. I cannot say, and that's I always say it's not rocket science. It's tougher than that.
How can you get these predators for treatment in your area?
Okay, so that's going to be Tammara might be able to talk on that as well. There's a lot of work being done by Forest Service. They are U.S. Forest Service. They're assisting state agencies on establishing beetles. There's the work that the Virginia Tech has with the predator database that I showed you. So they're working with the universities as well on choice areas, trying to get ahead of the wave or of the Adelgid with biocontrol.
And yeah, and I just want to note here, we do have a question from Lem that involves the 80K Forever Wild provisions. I figured Tammara would probably take that, and she did in the chat. So if anyone's interested in that, please check it out in the chat. Another one for you, Jesse. We have a couple more here. Can you speak briefly to messaging, PR, and managing expectations around tree mortality?
Well, I think managing PR might be more of an aspect of what we've seen here is again the firm support that we had from friends and visitors as well, to understand that again, not every tree is going to be treated. We're prioritizing areas. You're going to see mortality in areas as well. So to understand that, we had to address that with the closure of Parsons Branch Road. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, we have a couple more, and I think these will be fairly quick, and then we'll move on to Tammara because we are getting a little late here. Is the IPM available to read online, and if so, where could someone find it?
Yeah, so we've got links to in the Smoky's site. Hopefully, you can do it on our webpage. There'll be a land on site with Forest Health and Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. You're gonna find that. TNC, I know in Tennessee, and they've got a pretty good webpage on that. And Cornell has got an excellent website on that.
Okay, great. And what is the application method for chemical treatments?
Oh, that varies. There's a deep need for multiple factors to be played into that by agencies. But what I would also like to highlight to the public is there's something you can do for your own trees in your backyard, and they do have, even in small numbers, those trees have value. And it's very cost effective and very reasonable, very easy for homeowners to, quote, treat their trees.
All right, I'll give you this last one here, then we'll move on. And Lem has a question there that I think Tammara will be able to answer about spreading HWA by moving nursery trees. But for you, Jesse, I'd ask, do you recommend the chemical treatment and biocontrol to be used together in an IPM plan?
So that is an aspect that agencies are working through now, and it is a very, very plausible, effective approach. I guess the concern at first was like people see these treated areas as these zones, these like areas that are anywhere in that polygon or that perimeter. Every tree's been treated and no beetles can beat it. Well, that's not the case. There's a lot of there's multiple I guess strategies that need to be played out by lands managers based on the densities of hemlocks in that stand and availability of food for the beetles. And really that's the odd catch-22 that we have. You need HWA to keep these beetles moving and alive.
Well, thank you, Jesse. We have a lot of comments in here just thanking you for your time today. And I just want to extend that thank you from all of us for your time today. It was a great presentation. And you as well, Mark, of course. We're going to pass it over to Tammara now. Tammara's going to briefly go over Forest Pest Hunters, the program. So feel free to stick around and check that out. It's a great way people can get involved by volunteering. It helps us gather data and so on these forest pests.
That's great. If you can hang on for about 5 minutes or so, or 10 minutes, I'd be happy to chat with you a little bit about how you can get involved in the Adirondacks. And Sean, you'll have to remind me how I get the screen.
If you want, I could just advance the slides for you if you just want to say next.
That's great. You can
that
just
might be a little quicker. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about our Forest Pest Hunter program. But first of all, I want to thank Mark for giving us that great overview of Adirondack forests. And, you know, I think you really made it clear that we sometimes think of our forests as one thing, but they are really a lot of different habitats that are directly tied to the soil and slope conditions. And then particularly our beech and hemlock forests are really defined by those species. Those species, because of their shade tolerance, really affect what's happening in the entire ecosystem of those forests. And as Jesse mentioned, without some intervention on those hemlock forests, we will face ecological extinction potentially of our hemlock forests. And so I was smiling when Jesse was saying too, a lot of people say, well, why don't you just give up now? Well, of course, there are many of us who are not willing to give up on hemlock now. We want to be able to keep enough of that genetic diversity alive. And as I always say, the key to the survival of our forests is out there. We just need to spend the time and find the tools to find where it is. So there's a lot that's going on with the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program. We do help the state manage some of the infestation on Lake George. So we do a bunch of chemical treatment, and we have 2 chemical applicators on our staff. We also manage Dome Island, which the Nature Conservancy owns, and we have pretty much treated every tree and every hemlock tree on Dome Island now in the last 4 years, a few left to go. We also are assisting with the release of biocontrols, and in New York State, that is mostly done through the New York State Hemlock Initiative. Some of those folks are on the call. If you haven't gone to the New York State Hemlock Initiative's website, you'll find a wealth of information about options for landowners, integrated pest management, and then they are the ones who are rearing and releasing and studying the biocontrols in New York State. But what I want to talk about today, and one more project we're working on that I'm excited about, is we're working with the University of Connecticut to try to find genetic resistance to hemlock woolly adelgid. So we're sending samples of all kinds of hemlock germplasm to University of Connecticut as part of their studies. So a lot of pieces at play here, no one tool in the toolbox. But one of the things that is most important is our volunteer forest pest hunters. And so you can just do a couple quick advances. Sean, there we go. Pick those right up and I'll just buzz through them. So if you are not a forest pest hunter, I'd want to tell you a little bit about it, but I know we did have some of our forest pest hunters on the line today, and I want to thank them because these are folks who get a little bit of training and who are willing to spend hours in the woods, sometimes with their furry companions. We ask you to adopt a trail in the winter for HWA, and if you can in the summer to look for beech leaf disease. And really that data then gets entered into this New York State IMAP Invasive database. We are the envy of many other states because of the data that we have. But it's that data that we get from the volunteers that tells us and tells New York State DEC where to go to do the next set of treatments, what areas are most threatened. Without those IMAP invasives points and without those eyes on the ground, we'd never know that. So go ahead and advance, Sean. Again and again, yeah, and we have fun. Go ahead. So since 2001, I think that's actually 2021. So that might be a typo. We've had 40 volunteers actually, and just in the last 3 years we've run it, we've had almost 2,000 uploads to IMAP invasives, and 1,000 hours have been donated. I think Bill Widrig and Dom Peters might be on the line. They're responsible for a lot of those hours. But what we found just in last season alone is our volunteers found about 200 positive identifications of hemlock woolly adelgid. That helps us know where this pest currently is and where we need to focus our treatment efforts in order to help contain it to the Lake George area. And go ahead, Sean. So there's 4 simple things you can do to get involved, and you can find all of this on our website, adkinvasives.com. And the first step is, if you're new, you'll want to sign up for IMAP invasives. And there are some tools on our website to show you how to do that. Also, if you're new, you'll want to review the training that we did last year. It's a recorded webinar just like today. And then you'll want to, our new and returning volunteers, adopt the map, and then also just refresh the protocol. So Sean, if you can just buzz through a couple of quick slides on IMAP invasives. If you don't have an IMAP invasives account, go to your desktop. That's the easiest way to do it, or your laptop, and set up an account. Click. Once you sign in, go ahead and click. You create your account, click again. And you join in New York, click again. All of this is on our website. Keep clicking. What's most important is you'll find all these instructions on our website, and the APIPP team is happy to help you with this if you are not familiar with how to use IMAP invasives. So we can walk you through it. There's also some great webinars on IMAP invasives webpage. But once you've set up your account, and you're in and you're trying to set up your account, what we'd like you to do is don't join APIPP as an organization. You join the APIPP Volunteer Forest Pest Monitoring Project. So 3 clicks in a row, I think. There we go, Sean. Right, so you select, you'll get a chance to select a project. You select APIPP Volunteer Forest Pest Monitoring, click again, Sean. You request to join the project. What that does is that means that we get to see all the data that you're putting in, and we can collectively see how many reports our forest pest volunteers put in. Last year in 2023, between beech leaf disease and hemlock woolly adelgid, we had 950 IMAP invasives reports made, both observations of not detected and detected. Go ahead and click, Sean. The best thing to do next is set it up on your mobile app. Click again. The cool thing about the mobile app, and this is what you want to do, you want to take that out in the field with you, click again, Sean, is that when you're actually out in the field, you don't have to have internet access. You can be using it, you can go ahead and you can enter your observations on your mobile app, on your phone while you're out in the field, and then you can upload it when you get back and you've got good email connectivity. So click again, Sean. And so you go in the field, you add your observation, perfectly fine, doesn't matter. Most places in the Adirondacks, you don't have cell service, but you can go ahead and add your observation. Click again, Sean. And what's most important is going to ask you for a photo. That's really helpful. And in fact, Bill had some good photos the other day trying to ask a bunch of us, is this really hemlock woolly adelgid or is it not? It's sometimes helpful to put something against a background to be able to see a good photo, but the clearer you can get it, the better. Click again. And if you can focus up close enough, the one on the hand there, it's not really close enough for me to be able to see those woolly masses. So the closer you can get to that, the more that I'd be able to tell whether it is hemlock woolly adelgid from a photo or a look-alike. Okay, and then a couple more clicks, Sean. So click 3 clicks, I think. So the simple thing is you've done this all in the field. You get back from the field. You have a chance to check each of those little boxes. Yes, I'm ready to upload these. You want to upload from the field. You say yes, and you hit upload. And then somebody does look at all those records, actually. In addition to folks at Department of Environmental Conservation, Becca and Zach and I, we look at a lot of these records, and everyone that's a potential positive we look at. So thank you for that. And keep clicking, Sean. And so again, if you are new, check out the webinar on our website from last year. Another click, Sean. And one of the things that will do is it'll help you better understand what is a hemlock, how to find a hemlock, what does a adelgid look like. Go ahead, click again. The thing is, hemlock woolly adelgid does not always look so beautiful. You don't always get that nice big bright woolly masses over every leaf that you can see. Sometimes they're just in this very small phase. So the webinar will help you kind of see it in its different life stages, and click again. And the webinar will also go through what are some of the lookalikes, because we also have hemlock elongate scale. Sometimes there's spittle bugs, sometimes there's spider egg masses, and it's great because the webinar will help with that. Click again. Just a couple more slides here. So once you've done that, and again, if you are a returning volunteer, sign up for a trail map. a trail to protect if you are to monitor. If you are new, once you've set up your IMAP account and watched the webinar, then please sign up for a trail. We have this live trail map on our website. As of Tuesday, we had 18 trails already adopted for the season. Once you find a little dot that you want to go survey, you can click on that. That'll open it up. You can sign up and get your name attached to that trailhead. And there's also a little bit of directions there about how you get there and how you can access that trail. So please sign up. I think we had about 100 trails adopted last year. We want to see if we can do that again this year. And please click again. So we have a full survey protocol on our website. A couple of tools that are really handy is you want your IMAP invasives. If you have a high power headlamp, we found that if you shine that up and you look at the underside of the leaves, that Adelgid, those white wool, sometimes really jumps out. The higher power headlamp you have, the easier it is to spot when you're standing on the ground. And sometimes the hand lens is helpful, but you don't need to have that. And poles become a useful thing, partly if you want to help with navigation on the ground and your stability, but I'll get into a minute another way that poles can be helpful. And then click again, John. So one of the things when you're out there, as I said, you're not always going to see lots and lots of wool masses. You want to train your eyes to just see if there's one or two little wool masses on a branch, because that's most often what you're going to encounter here as the early stages of the infestation. Click again. And you can do 2 or 3 clicks. There we go. All right. So I'll just go through these. So our protocol is pretty simple. Like I like to think of it as look for 10, hike for 10. So you're hiking along, you start out at that trailhead you picked, you come across a group of hemlocks, you're just looking at most of the branches along the trail. The thing is, it is spotty right now in a lot of places, so it's not going to be on every tree. And the more different trees you can look at and most of the branches that you can look at, that's going to be better, a better monitoring. Sometimes the branches aren't low enough. And as I said, there's another use for those poles. You can stick your pole up there and try and pull a branch down so that you can see the underside of it and you can see if it's got that Adelgid on there. So you want to check again, multiple branches, and you just want to check, you know, the hemlocks that are reachable from that place on the trail. I find that oftentimes I've exhausted the hemlocks that I can reasonably reach and look at in less than 10 minutes. It's okay. It's not magic. If you spend 5 or 6 minutes there, that's fine. Then you walk on and you go to the next, 10 minutes, or if it's not a lot of hemlock, maybe next 15 minutes. But it's kind of the rule of thumb. Check for 10, walk for 10. You're not going to look at every single hemlock. You want to look at as many as you can when you've stopped. Okay, and then the next one, Sean. This is just some places to look. Actually, why don't you just click again, Sean? So we're really interested in both the detections and not detections. And we don't want you to have to take a detection at every single tree you've looked at. It's just per area. So I said, so you've stopped, you've now looked at half a dozen trees, 10 trees, whatever you've been able to reach in that area. You've scoured a bunch of different branches per tree. I try to do at least 3 branches per tree. I don't see anything, so I enter 1 non-detect for that clump of trees. If I did find a detect, I'm going to put it right there. But you don't have to put a non-detect for every single tree, just each place where you've stopped. And then again, take high quality photos. A couple more clicks, Sean. This is just a reminder, it's winter out there, it's cold. Make sure if you are going that you have a headlamp and extra batteries, both for looking at the Adelgids and then also in case you get stuck out there. Don't exceed your experience. If you are going to be searching in the high peaks, remember we do have more than 8 inches of snow depth now, so you're going to have snowshoes or skis. That's required by law in the high peaks wilderness. Just make sure you know what the rules are where you're going. Another click, Sean. just a couple of other things, but hypothermia can happen, and your fingers are going to be cold when you're going back in and out of your gloves to use your phone. So I find that hand warmers are really handy to have, just to get my hands warm again when I put them back in my gloves. And also, if you're feeling really cold, you can always take them. Don't put them directly against your skin, but you can put them on your shirt, and you can use them to warm up and prevent hypothermia. Make sure you've got your traction or your microspikes out there. Not everybody can go with a partner, but if you can go with a partner, that's great. If you can't go with a partner, please let someone know that you're out there, and what trailhead you started at that day. That will be really helpful for all of us. One more click. We covered that a little bit, so I'm just going to go to the last one. So really, it is mostly fun. It's a great chance to get out there in the winter. You can get us data. I mean, the 1,000 hours that our volunteers have put in, our boots on the ground, we could never get there. So we appreciate all of you doing that for us. Again, we've got a lot of folks who can help. You can email me, Becca, if you want to drop your email and my email in the chat, you can just get a hold of us directly and we can answer any of your questions. We have a lot of partners that are helping us with that this year. And so thanks to all of the groups listed here for partnering with us, helping us get the word out and getting volunteers: the Lake George Land Conservancy, Champlain Area Trails, Ausable River Association, Hemlock Initiative, Adirondack Mountain Club, of course, IMAP Invasives for hosting the great website, and then the Adirondack Prism and the Capital Region Prism. So thanks for all of that. And Sean, I don't know if you want to take any more questions now, or we can open it up from here. Oh,
we'll do a couple more questions here real quick. I want to give a shout out to our upcoming webinars. We do have our two Prism partner meetings coming up, our terrestrial and our aquatic meetings. Those are Wednesday, February 7th and Thursday, February 8th, and both of those run from 10 to 11:30 a.m. And then we have kind of a partner meeting to this one, or webinar rather, to this one, Adirondack Lake Ecology and how invasive species disrupt aquatic ecosystems. It's going to be a lot like this one, but it's going to cover all things aquatic. And if you enjoyed this one, you should definitely check it out. And that webinar will also include how you can become a lake protector, which is sort of the aquatic counterpart to our Forest Pest Hunters program. Very interesting stuff. And finally, we do have outreach materials. These are free. I won't talk too much about them. Just to mention, we have basically outreach materials that cover aquatic and terrestrial invasive species. It gives people tips on what to do or what not to do to prevent the spread. And then we also have our field guide to terrestrial invasive species of the Adirondacks. This covers 28 invasive species that are found in the Adirondacks, with the exception of 1 or 2 that are not quite here yet, that we want people to be aware of. And it's a pocket-sized book. It fits in your pocket, and it breaks down how to identify plants and then where to look for them, and so on and so forth. So feel free to visit our website or email me directly if you're interested in any of this. If you want to register for one of our webinars or partner meetings, you can go to adkinvasives.com/events. And from there, we will field any questions that we have here in the chat. Tammara, there was one about moving hemlock trees from the south. Is there a risk to moving hemlock trees from the south to the north in terms of spreading HWA? And I think I know the answer to this one, but I'll let Tammara talk. And Tammara, you're on mute.
Yes, actually, and I was just typing an answer to that. Yes, there is a risk of moving it. There's a risk of moving hemlock woolly adelgid from southern U.S., but also trees that are coming in from other parts of the world. As we said, a lot of our adelgid is related to, probably came in on Japanese hemlock trees that were planted for nursery stock. So New York State does prohibit the transportation of adelgid infected trees, but they do show up sometimes. And we have a couple of folks, actually, I think maybe even on this call or that we know, who have had eagle eyes and have spotted them at nurseries and have, kindly informed the owner. And you can also report that to the New York State Department of Ag and Markets, because they will send an inspector out and make sure to confiscate those trees and not have them planted out. So yes, if you are buying any hemlock trees, please check them carefully.
And I should mention too, in my follow-up email, I will send a link to the recording of this webinar, but I'll also send some other links with some information, how to order outreach materials, how to sign up to become a forest pest hunter, IMAP invasives, and that sort of thing, just in
Right.
case you're wondering. We did
Sean,
have a
I
question.
did see that, but yeah, Becca also answered for forest pest hunters, you don't have to just sign up for a trail. If you have, those trails are all on public lands. If you have private land, your own backyard, your neighbor's backyard, you've got permission to be on private lands, by all means, just go ahead and drop an IMAP point in. You do not have to always adopt a trail. There's plenty of other places to survey, but do make sure if you are on private land that you have permission from the owner to be on that property.
And we did have a question about, are there other invasive species tracked? Becca fielded this one in the chat, but just for the interest of the group, like, yes, IMAP can be used for all invasive species, and it's used by resource managers to track the extent of of these species. And then there was another interesting question about emerald ash borer, and right now our forest pest center program does just focus on HWA and beech leaf disease.
However, if you do see signs of emerald ash borer, please drop it into IMAP invasives. Right now, we do know emerald ash borer is in Warren County and is in Clinton County. We don't have positives in other counties yet, so we do want to keep track of that the same way. So if you do have a suspect ash tree, please drop it into IMAP invasives, and the minute you do, we will get an alert and start looking at it. So thanks for that.
And we've had a lot of fantastic questions in the chat today. I don't want to miss any, so we could take the last few seconds here. If anybody had a question they didn't ask yet, or one that we accidentally missed, please just come off of mute and feel free to ask any of our presenters. Going once?
I had a question.
Oh,
can you hear
sure,
me?
go ahead.
So I just put my question in the chat, but I wouldn't mind to talk about it. So I'm actually a hydrologist in Michigan, but I grew up in the southern Adirondacks on a small stream that is actually the source of the drinking water for the city of Amsterdam. And that I know from personal experience that whole watershed and the property my mom still lives on is probably, I don't know, 80% hemlock. And being kind of on the front of the Adirondacks, I'm really concerned that if it's not there already, it will be soon. And just from a like hydrological standpoint, I feel like this area, this particular watershed, which is mostly owned by the city of Amsterdam, so as a public resource, could be really a critical area just for their perspective. And I can look into monitoring that particular road and our property, but who would I talk to if I wanted to know if like the people who manage that watershed and the drinking water intake are thinking about this and doing monitoring there, as an example?
That is a great question. And I don't know if I have any colleagues on the phone who are familiar with the city of Amsterdam. I have not seen them active in our coalitions here in the Adirondack Park, but it would be a great thing to just call the city and find out if they have a forester. I know like City of Albany does have a forester that's working on their watershed plan for the city of Albany. So if they do have a forester, we'd be happy to talk with that person and have a chance to, make sure they're looking for hemlock woolly adelgid. If they're not tied in with our network, we'd be happy to do that. Also, if the city of Amsterdam is willing to allow people to access that property, I know there are forest pest hunters who would probably be happy to go out there and start looking. So I would say the first call you could make or your family could make is to the city of Amsterdam and find out if they have someone or if they're keeping track of that. I saw your question was also about hemlock conservation areas. That's sort of a new thing in New York. We have not formally established hemlock conservation areas in New York State. Some of the New York State parks have. I know that, for instance, hemlock woolly adelgid has hit Moreau State Park. That is the sort of northernmost occurrence in some of those.
I grew up camping there.
That's right, I know. And so Parks has done a great job. They're just beginning to define some hemlock conservation areas there. And they have just a few areas that they're treating for hemlock woolly adelgid. They're not going to be able to keep it out of the entire park. And we're beginning to have some discussions with DEC about like, how do we tackle that on, 3 million acres of forest preserve land? but we're just beginning to have those conversations. So I think we have a lot to learn from places like the Smokies, because that whole notion of, I think the part of the thing with hemlock conservation areas is you have to accept that there are some areas that are not going to get focused on. And so we're going to have to drill down and prioritize where are the places that we're going to focus. And I think at this point, we've sort of been more crossing our fingers and hoping that we didn't have to do that. But many of us working in this field are now at the point like, yeah, we've got to pick where are those places that are most important to focus on right now. And I think that work is going to advance this year in the southern, like in the Lake George area to start with.
Yeah, and it's a shame because I would say the other dominant species is beech, and that they're all gone or going. And the ash is already gone too. So great. Well, that I appreciate that. So I'll look into that, and I really appreciate all the presentations today. Were really wonderful, and I'm going to get my mom set up as a volunteer, and she can at least do the road.
All right, great. And I do want to say, you know, we have a project that we started this year to release biocontrols for emerald ash borer in Warren County. So that's a really exciting thing. We are working with the Hemlock Initiative and their biocontrol releases in the Adirondacks for hemlock woolly Adelgid. And we're also working with folks at Holden Arboretum to think about, well, what would a resistant beech tree look like, and how would we be able to work with them to collect seeds to treat, to breed for resistance. So while it does seem depressing that all those species are under such high threats, there's also a lot of hope out there too.
Yeah, I appreciate Jesse for the hope, because I've been feeling pretty devastated whenever I go home and think about it. So
Yeah, that was a great discussion. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, if not, feel free to reach out to us anytime if you do come up with a question or you need more information. I just want to thank everybody one more time for being here today, and look forward to a follow-up email from me shortly. And thanks again to our speakers.
Thanks, Sean.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Bye, everyone.